Last week, we ranked all 32 quarterbacks in the NFL. So if you missed it, go check that out last week. But today, we're going to double down on it because you guys loved it. We're going to be ranking the top 5 running backs, receivers, tight ends, head coaches, you name it. We're going to rank it here. Let's get into it. Of course, if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe. We're on the road to 14,000, and we're right there. So, of course, if you enjoy, tell a friend to tell a friend. But Amir, you're joining us today as we're going to recap our quarterbacks, but then dive into the other positions. Your thoughts here, and how you doing here on this Thursday morning?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be back like always. It's a blessing to always be on this channel and, do what I love to do, which is talk about football.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I mentioned, if you guys enjoy, we're right there. I think we're 50 or so subs away from 14,000. So,
It's
of course,
close.
hit that big red button. But we're going to recap our quarterbacks here. So if you missed last week, here's our general top 5, or at least this is what we kind of, averaged out to last week, as we had Aaron Rodgers at 5. The old man, of course, had a career year last year with the Jets. Of course, at least the hype was there. A disappointing year for Aaron Rodgers last year, but we know the talent is still there, right? A guy like Aaron Rodgers doesn't rely on his mobility as much as other guys around the league. So this is a guy that's going to come back, the most accurate quarterback of all time, like he always has been. And I think he might even be better than ever coming into this next season with a chip on his shoulder. But thoughts about Aaron Rodgers? Why do you think he's still a top 5 guy in the league?
Yeah, I can understand why people would say no, but, just like you just mentioned, I talked about this last week, an Achilles injury, won't mean that much to a guy that's already not, using his legs as much anyway. And so, for Rodgers, the only concern that I have, coming into this year is that, his last year in Green Bay, he didn't play that well. So I don't know if, that was kind of us getting like a sneak peek of him declining or what. But, I think the talent is still going to be there. I think he's going to come into this Jets offense. The O-line obviously needs some work, but he's going to have a great running back. There's a solid receiving core, amazing defense. I think he has everything around him to still solidify himself as a top 5 quarterback.
Absolutely. At number 4, we have the 2-time MVP in Lamar Jackson, a guy that 4 years ago won the award, and we thought, hey, this dude's going to take over the league. And not that he hasn't, but this dude has still been a top 5 level quarterback the last couple of years. The playoff success hasn't been what he's wanted, but let's remind ourselves that only one team can win it on a yearly basis. Lamar Jackson has been everything for the Baltimore Ravens in the postseason this year. He opened up the postseason with a first-round bye, but then he had a 4-touchdown game against a promising Texans defense to get them to the AFC title game where, a fumble here and there or a missed throw here or there doesn't happen. Who knows? The Ravens could have made Super Bowl 58, and we could be talking about a different story here. But Lamar Jackson, the most dynamic quarterback of probably all time, at least if not the most mobile quarterback of all time. Your thoughts here about Lamar, and I guess why is he still a top four guy despite the playoff success?
Yeah, I think Lamar Embiid, Jackson, is perfect at 4. I think for him, the biggest knock for him is, which is why I think he's worse than the 3 quarterbacks above him, is because of his playoff performances. Obviously that game against Houston, that was his first complete playoff game, in my opinion. Even his first win, in his career against Tennessee, he did not play great that game.
Yeah.
You go ahead and look at, his career up to this point, his talent, isn't being talked about, or being questioned. His skill set isn't being questioned. It's just him performing in the playoffs. And I think that's what's holding him back from entering that top 3 conversation.
When we talk about the top 3, Amir, we talk about it, and we just had a bigger conversation in the group chat just yesterday around this time. But Josh Allen is at 2 for you, Joe Burrow at 3 for you. I have it vice versa. I think Joe Burrow is the second best player in football. Josh Allen might even be 3. He's not too far behind. But we've had this debate before. You have him, of course, Josh Allen. I prefer Joe Burrow. Is there anything you want to dive into here? Maybe bring the group chat to the podcast if you want to. If not, if you don't want to get to that long-winded conversation, we don't have to. But your thoughts
Yeah,
here?
honestly, not really. I think, when you make these lists, they're really hard to rank, these quarterbacks because there's so much talent. And I think for these 2 guys, they're literally right there neck and neck, like, in the same tier. I think, we're probably one game, if Josh Allen beats KC, we'll probably have him at number 2, but he lost. I think, Josh Allen and Joe Burrow are like right there neck and neck. So I think it's interchangeable.
Yeah, and when we talked about it, in the group chat, of course, we had some other guys chime in as well. So shout out to AJ, Zach, of course, everyone else in the group chat, Bakari. But I guess I'll bring this to the podcast because why not, right? We have some time. My main reason, we talked about it. We said we can agree that Josh Allen and Joe Burrow are on the same playing field. When we talk about quarterbacks or just players in general, they're on the same playing field. What separates Joe Burrow and Josh Allen to me, well, is one, the turnover issues, but two, is the playoff success. I think when you have two players on the same playing field in any sport or any company across the world, when two people are on the same playing field, the one that has had, that has succeeded in the toughest situations, or in this case, in the playoffs for Joe Burrow, he's at least gotten his team to the Super Bowl. I think that is all the edge that you kind of need in an argument like this. But I understand the talent perspective of Josh Allen. Josh Allen might be the most talented quarterback in the entire league. He just hasn't got it done at the level of Joe Burrow. And that's my basic argument. Your counter argument to that, as far as playoff success and maybe, Josh Allen, why he's still above despite that playoff success.
Yeah, so for Josh Allen, especially when it comes to the NFL, the NBA, you can kind of hold a little more weight on lack of success. But the thing about Josh Allen is Josh Allen, you never have to go into the playoffs question, is he going to play good? Like, he plays absolutely amazing in the playoffs. He's had some legacy moments, and I think for Josh Allen, and playing in the NFL, you got to have to, talk about context behind why they're losing these games. And, it's kind of like how you talk about the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. The reason why the Ravens haven't been winning, in my opinion, is because Lamar Jackson hasn't, played to the level which he should be. If he does, they get over that hump. I think for Josh Allen, it's the complete opposite. I think he's playing on that level. I think his team is selling him short. I brought up the stat, the past 4 playoff losses for Josh Allen. His defense is averaging, around 34 points given up. I think Josh Allen, is honestly, pretty much outperforming Joe Burrow, in the playoffs in his career up to this point. The only thing you could argue was Burrow making him, lead them to the Super Bowl. But, Joe Burrow's team honestly helped him out. His defense played great in that playoff run. His team around him honestly played well.
Yeah, I think you seem to forget that the Bengals did not have the 2000 Ravens defense, and Joe Burrow is not Trent Dilfer. That was just my basic argument when we talked about that in the group chat. But again, if you want to hear us deep dive and talk about these guys just a little bit more, go check out last Thursday's video. Of course, it already has around 2,000 views, so hard to miss. You'll see Tua's big head, of course, on the thumbnail. But when we talk about number one, it's not really a debate, and of course, you guys at home know this. We're not going to insult your intelligence. This is a guy that is the gap between 1 and 2A and 2B is so large. It's crazy because this is the guy that is in a class of his own, and we need to start doing these quarterback lists, Amir, without Patrick Mahomes going forward.
Right.
Because this is a guy that's more so in the conversation with Brady, more so than these other quarterbacks that are great, but they're just not on the level of Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, and other greats like Joe Montana and Peyton Manning, right? But Patrick Mahomes, number one, we're not going to insult your intelligence. Let's get over to the running backs. On the left side here, I gave the edge to Saquon, but you gave the edge to Kyren Williams. Kyren would have been my 5. If not, we have some honorable mentions. Guys like Alvin Kamara had a resurgence level year. He's also, he could be argued for this list. Guys like Breece Hall, guys like Jahmyr Gibbs. Those are some guys that we left off this list, but they could definitely be in the running, and I'm not going to fight you too hard for this number 5 spot. But I have Saquon. I think it's just the talent is still there. I'm hoping he goes to a team maybe like the Texans here in the offseason, and we'll talk about that next week with some free agency predictions. But Saquon, I think the talent's there. His just situation hasn't been the greatest. Even 2 years ago when they made the playoffs, they still didn't really have an offensive line for him to control this offense. It was really just him being Superman on a play-to-play basis. So that's why I have him here, just based off the talent. But you have Kyren Williams, a guy that in his second year, really his rookie year, kind of came out of nowhere and really, took over this Los Angeles backfield for the Rams, of course. And he was really a pivotal part on why this team almost made it to the second round of the playoffs. But your thoughts here about Kyren Williams in his really rookie season?
Yeah, this running backs list was probably the hardest to make because I think for running backs, they're all interchangeable. I think number 1 is solidified. In my opinion, number 2 is solidified. I think after that, there's so many guys you just mentioned that could easily be in this list. You argue Josh Jacobs could be in this
I
bottom
love
3.
Josh Jacobs, the player.
Exactly. Some guys, the thing about running backs is there's new running backs emerging every single year.
Jerome
And so,
Ford.
the thing about Saquon is I kind of look at, kind of like in an NBA perspective, right? If I'm ranking players, like of last year, if I was to rank, top 5 players, right? it's kind of hard for me to put Kawhi in that conversation if he hasn't been healthy and hasn't, played
Yeah.
consistently. And so, for Saquon, it's the same thing. Saquon, the talent is there. In my opinion, he's the most talented running back in the league.
Yeah.
As far as like, just the eye test alone. And, the fact that he hasn't played, it's hard for me to put him, at that 5 spot.
Yeah. Absolutely. But then at number 4, we're going to talk about the King, Derrick Henry. He's a pending free agent. Who knows? For all we know, he could return to the Tennessee Titans, but all signs right now point to him having a new home for the first time in his NFL career. A guy that at the collegiate level dominated, a guy at the high school level set records. Of course, he went to Alabama. He dominated there. He won in Alabama, but he hasn't really won, at least more so than a playoff game or two in the NFL. Now he looks to do that. He looks to put himself in a position to do that, whether it's with the Eagles, the Chiefs. There's a lot of different teams. The Ravens are a team that he could go to, but for a player perspective, I think the last 2 years have been rough due to his situation, just like Saquon Barkley. But Derrick Henry, to me, he's 30, but he's still Derrick Henry. Nobody wants to tackle this dude after the third quarter. And just like the number 2 guy, they're just powerhouses. And I think just based on pure strength, this is a guy that just terrorizes defenses. So Derrick Henry to me is still a top 4 running back despite his last 2 seasons. But your thoughts about the King? Is he still an elite running back here in the NFL?
Yeah, for Derrick Henry, people kind of had questions about him being able to come back, from being hurt last year, kind of, the hits taking a toll on his body and his running style. But I mean, this year he showed alone, as bad as Tennessee was, he still emerged and still kind of solidified himself in that conversation, in my eyes.
Yeah. Shout out to Tajay Spears, the Tulane Green Wave running back in the NFL right now, and he's going to he's going to have his chance to take over next year in Tennessee. Unless they go draft another running back. Who knows? Maybe a guy like Audric Estime coming out of Notre Dame. He looks like the next Derrick Henry. He might be in Nashville next season. Of course, we'll have to get into that draft topics here in a couple weeks. But at number 3, Jonathan Taylor, a guy that's of course, had a lot of contract questions. We didn't even know if this guy was going to play for the Colts because of his contract situation. He misses the first month or so of the season due to contract situations. Yet again, I sound like a broken record, but stick with me. And then he comes back, he looks good, and then he injures his hand. And then he comes back and he looks good yet again. This is a guy that's, I think is just super talented. He has the situation around him. He has a mobile quarterback to take the pressure off of him. But he also has one of the better offensive lines, even though it's taken a step back. I think when it comes back next year, this is a guy that could have that same impact on his team of a Christian McCaffrey, of a guy in the number 2 spot. But your thoughts here about JT and why you have him as a top 3 running back?
When JT was healthy, he was absolutely amazing, absolutely great. And, like you just mentioned, I think he has a great head coach in him, a great play caller. And I think going into this next year, he's going to be great if he stays healthy. Absolutely amazing.
And then at number 2, our hearts and our bias want to say he's the number 1 running back in the NFL, but logic tells us not only just got hurt, and no, he has maybe the greatest impact on his team. Let's take a step back and let's see him do it coming off of this injury. But at number 2, Amir, we have Batman. We have Nicholas Chubb coming back, and I think right now there's a lot of delusional people around there because from a cap situation, sure. There's been rumors that the Browns might have to cut him due to cap casualties this offseason. I'm telling you, there's a less than a percent of a chance.
It is no chance that ever happens.
Exactly, especially in a Kevin Stefanski offense. Maybe let's say we struggled last year and Kevin Stefanski was going to get fired. Maybe I'd say we see a small percentage that he gets cut this offseason. But let me tell you, this is a Cleveland Brown for life. Nick Chubb is quite literally the Kawhi Leonard of the NFL. This is a guy that's quiet. He doesn't make a lot of noise, but on the field, you can feel his impact. This is a guy that's just super dominant. And if it wasn't for, say what you want, and, if it was a dirty hit or whatever the case may be, if it wasn't for that unfortunate, draw play in the red zone, might I add, against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Nick Chubb would have probably been in the Offensive Player of the Year running, especially with how the Browns finished the season. Who knows? Maybe if we have Nick Chubb, we beat the Houston Texans. But maybe it's our bias, Amir. Why? Maybe talk me into why Nick Chubb is still a top 2 running back despite this big knee injury.
Yeah, for Nick Chubb, I mean, even if you look at those 2 games that he played, he looked like he was absolutely amazing. Like he was really going to be, arguably the best running back in the league.
Yeah.
And, exactly. And for Chubb, aside from Christian McCaffrey, out of all the running backs in the league, he by far has the most impact on his team at the running back position. There's only two running backs that are, not replaceable in this league. And it's those number two spots.
Yeah.
For Nick Chubb, it's like, coming into next year, I still don't expect him to lose much of a step. O-line's going to be back healthy. Nick Chubb is going to do Nick Chubb things. In that offense, he absolutely shines.
Yeah, you touched on it there that two running backs are just irreplaceable in this league. Even Jonathan Taylor, when he was out, Zach Moss looked really good in that Indianapolis Colts offense. He looked like almost a Pro Bowler. I wasn't sure if he made it or not. I kind of forgot at this point. But number one and number two, irreplaceable backs because the Browns. I'll put this out there. Nick Chubb, it was a run-focused offense. When he got hurt, this offense completely changed its philosophy. We talked about it. This team went from a run-focused offense and play action later to throw first and then run later. And of course, that happened when Joe Flacco, and we realized Jerome Ford can't be a number one running back. At best, he's a change of pace back. But Nick Chubb has that much impact on a team. And when we come back next year, I expect a lot of the same, where we're going to run the ball and force teams to stop us. At number one, well, there's not really a debate. This guy could have been the MVP, and we wouldn't even have batted an eye. Christian McCaffrey, of course, like you mentioned there's two running backs that were irreplaceable for their teams, and there's two running backs that have such a great impact on their team that, again, they're irreplaceable. That is number one. And number two, Christian McCaffrey, if they won that game, he probably would have been the Super Bowl MVP. But your thoughts here and why Christian McCaffrey is the number one running back in football?
In my opinion, he was the MVP this year. I know a lot of Ravens fans and, quarterback fans don't like that. But, McCaffrey, outside of, QBs, I think he has the most impact on this team. This Niners team is great and all. I think they have a lot of talent, but the offense completely ran through him, and that's rare nowadays.
Yeah.
For McCaffrey, similar to Mahomes and the rest of the quarterbacks, it's him number one, and the rest of the league isn't even close.
Yeah. If I will have to see how Nick Chubb looks when he comes back, but I think Nick Chubb, is not as far away, but I definitely think there's a gap between one and the rest of the field. But McCaffrey, as you touched on it there, as great and as talented and as deep as this Niners team is, McCaffrey's the best player on that great of a team. So it just shows the greatness of a guy like Christian McCaffrey. And next year, hopefully we get him to be as healthy as he was this year here in San Francisco. Moving over to wide receivers. At number 5, it might be a hot take, so let me throw out some of these honorable mentions. I had a guy, I had Davante Adams on my list, just based on the law of averages. If I can talk, stick with me. He did not make the list, so Davante Adams didn't make it. And we both had A.J. Brown right outside of the top 5. So those two guys are some of the biggest names that were off of the list. Of course, some other guys like Keenan Allen could have had an argument, and some other guys around the league, of course. A guy like Mike Evans, you brought up right before the show after his consecutive, he's having great seasons despite his situation. But at number 5, I'm glad to say that this is my favorite receiver in the league, or if he's not one, he's two. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god for the Detroit Lions. I think he's not the flashiest. He's not the biggest, the most explosive receiver. He's not the biggest receiver, but he gets the job done, and he's just really a better version of Keenan Allen, in my opinion. But your thoughts here about Amon-Ra? Why do you have him as a top 5 wide receiver going into 2024?
Yeah, so for Amon-Ra, that fifth spot to me was between 3 people. It was him, A.J. Brown, and Mike Evans. The biggest thing that kind of separated for me from Amon-Ra is how he started to finish. Kind of like when I look at A.J. Brown, right? I understand Jalen Hurts progressively played worse and the offense played worse, but A.J. Brown progressively seemed like he kind of was losing confidence and taking a step back.
Yeah, he was dealing with injuries too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of took a toll on him. And, for Amon-Ra compared to Mike Evans, Mike Evans was great and all, but the problem with Mike Evans is he doesn't have any legacy to finding games, I should say. For him, it's always consistently, 70 yards, 80 yards, 80 yards, 60 yards. For Amon-Ra's having 150, 130, 140. That's some amazing games. Then you go ahead and talk about the things the measurables, the things you can't sound the stats. In my opinion, he's arguably, probably the best run blocking, receiver in the league. He's an amazing blocker. He kind of proved last year that he could potentially be a number 1 receiver on a championship team.
Yeah, I think he proved it again this year, like you mentioned. And like you said, for Mike Evans, he didn't have those crazy games. Amon-Ra had games where he was having, I think this year he had a game where he had 12 receptions for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's just stuff that you don't see from, I guess scheme wide receivers. This is a guy that is a true game changer. And shout out to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think I just love his name. At number 4, CeeDee Lamb, a guy that was right outside the list. I think I would prefer Devontae Adams. Just I know Devontae Adams hasn't been great the last couple of years, but we got to remember his situation. Nonetheless, though, CeeDee Lamb is on the rise, and he is, he's not going to get a big payday this offseason, but next year, this guy is going to be the highest paid wide receiver in the entire league. That is the kind of player that CeeDee Lamb is for this offense. And, he was kind of the reason this team was a 12-5 team going into the postseason. And some would say this is the best version. Well, I guess I would say that this was the best version of this Dak Prescott Cowboys team we've ever seen in this era. And I think CeeDee Lamb was a huge part of that. But your thoughts here, you have him as a top 3 wide receiver. I'm not there yet. But why is CeeDee a top 3 wide receiver for you in 2024?
Yeah, for CeeDee, I hate, jumping these guys who finally emerge, but man, like in my eyes, this season was way too great for me to go ahead and just, not put him top 3. And, the reason why I'm putting Tyreek and Justin Jefferson, I don't want to spoil it, but the reason why I had number 1 and number 2 over him, is for obvious reasons. But, that third spot in my eyes, man, CeeDee played way too great for me to go ahead and not put him in the top 3. I mean, 1,800 yards, he was in that Offensive Player of the Year conversation. I think if the Cowboys finish the season better, he ends up, potentially winning that award. And, the way he closed out the season was the most impressive part.
No, absolutely. And like, you're not really spoiling like much. I think we all know who 1 and 2 is. It's just a matter of who is number 1 and who is number 2. But at number 3, might shock you guys, but let's remember what he's done as a wide receiver in this league. Ja'Marr Chase, he's had the greatest rookie season of all time. Let's remember that a couple years back. But this is a guy that dealt with injuries last year. And not only did he deal with injuries on his own right, but he had no quarterback, at least no Joe Burrow, right? Jake Browning was a great backup. But again, there's levels to this. He's not even 2 or 3 tiers under Joe Burrow. I think Ja'Marr Chase definitely had some things going against him this year. But next year, I think this is a guy that can come back and yet again be a top 3 wide receiver with Joe Burrow healthy, hopefully with an improved offense in general. We know T. Higgins is going to be back, and he's going to be wanting to play for a new contract, whether if it's with the Bengals or another team, because he's going to get franchise tagged. I think Ja'Marr Chase next year can prove yet again, hey, I'm the number 1 on this team, and I can carry this team, when moments Joe Burrow isn't on his A game. I just think Ja'Marr Chase is such a special talent and already one of my favorite receivers of all time, as crazy as that might sound. Your thoughts here about Ja'Marr and why he's not yet better than a guy like CeeDee Lamb?
I wouldn't say he's better. I wouldn't say, he's not better. I think based off of last year's production, I think CeeDee, showed me why, he should be number 3. And, the injuries kind of, hurt Ja'Marr Chase. The fact that Joe Burrow wasn't playing, he was banged up all year long. That kind of hurt him a lot. But, for me, in my eyes, I thought CeeDee just played, that great to where he deserved number 3. And I think for Ja'Marr Chase, like you just mentioned, coming into next year, he's going to get Burrow back. This Bengals team is going to be hungry, angry. I think he's going to emerge back in that conversation.
Yeah, no argument there from me. I would have had him higher, right? Just based off personal preference. If we're ranking favorite wide receivers, Ja'Marr might be number 1, or it might be Amon-Ra. But those are my favorite 2 in the league. At number 2, Amir, I'm going to say that this is a guy that the more I thought about it, at first thought, I'm like, oh, this dude's number 1. There's no debate. But then when I really thought about it, and I was like, I just that person in that number 1 spot had such a special season, an MVP level season, that I kind of couldn't even have it as a 1A, 1B. Now, I will say, if I'm starting a team today, I'm taking this number 2 wide receiver to start my team. But I think just with how great of a season that number 1 guy had, Justin Jefferson, for the both of us, is at the number 2 spot. And again, it could be a 1A, 1B situation. If you had Jefferson above Tyreek Hill, I kind of spoiled it, but you guys knew. I'm not going to, I don't think either of us are going to really argue with you if you have him at number 1 over Tyreek Hill. But I just think Jefferson is now in a situation where we're going to talk about him later. Who knows? He might not even be a Minnesota Viking next year, even though he most likely will. But Justin Jefferson's, even when he came back from injury this year, he did not take an adjustment week. He came straight back into double-digit catches, carrying this offense with Jaren Hall as his quarterback and Joshua Dobbs, right? This is a guy that made them look great in spurts and in different moments. And I think that he's that special of a player where if he's playing, for a college team next year, he's going to elevate their offense no matter where he plays. He's that special of a receiver. And who knows, if he didn't get hurt, I think he could probably still be the number one wide receiver. But your thoughts about Justin Jefferson, and then you can kind of go right into number one.
I'll talk about both of them right here, man. I thought long and hard about this number one and number two. I spent hours thinking about this. I'm in class thinking like who's better, but in reality, I thought Tyreek Hill, the numbers he put up this year was way too great. And, for Justin Jefferson, I mean, the dude was hurt, and that's the only reason why I have him at number two. The fact that he didn't play, and the fact that this dude played 10 games and still had 1,100 yards,
Yeah,
is absolutely crazy. Like absolutely crazy. I think for him. At this point, I start comparing quarterbacks, and I'm like, personally, I think Kirk Cousins is better than Tua. I think if we were to see Kirk Cousins throw the ball to Tyreek, I think Tyreek Hill easily cracks 2,000 yards this past season.
Yeah, no, I think even like when you compare head coaches, a lot of people want to say that Mike McDaniel is an offensive genius. I think he is, but Kevin O'Connell, I think, is underrated. I think he's right there. I mean, let's not forget this Vikings team was just a 13-win team just 2 years ago when his stars were healthy. So, I think you touched on it there. I mean, we touched on it where it's Tyreek Hill just had that special of a season where I can't really put him as a 1A, 1B situation. He's just that, he had that great of a season. I sound like a broken record, but stick with me, where he gets the edge over a guy like Justin Jefferson. But again, there's no disrespect to either of these guys. They are one and they are two, no matter how you want to say it. At the tight end position, there's a three-way tie, so let's just talk about all of them. TJ Hockenson, a guy that had his first full season with the Vikings, great, especially in the moments that Justin Jefferson was out or Jordan Addison disappeared for some stretches of games. TJ Hockenson really was the backbone of this offense, especially with no running game there until late in the season. Sam Laporta put up rookie records across the board, and again, if he didn't get hurt, maybe he could have had a better postseason, but even with that injury late in the year, he still had a great postseason for a rookie tight end. And then Mark Andrews battled injuries all year. But at the same time, when he was playing, he was his same version. I think I just have him at 5 down here at the bottom, simply for the fact that these other two guys above him were a little bit healthier and just had overall better seasons, of course, over this last year or so. But your thoughts about these three and what order did you have them in? I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah, so I think this was probably the toughest. For me, I had Mark Andrews at 3, I had Laporta at 4, and Hawk at 5. And I think these three are interchangeable as well. I mean, like if you were to have Mark Andrews at 3, I wouldn't be mad. If you were to have Laporta at 3, I wouldn't be mad at you. And I think like you just touched on, Mark Andrews battled injuries. So I kind of cut him some slack. Gave him the benefit of the doubt because when he was healthy, he looked absolutely amazing. But I think Sam Laporta was slightly better than Hawk. I mean, like you just mentioned. I mean, the dude having 10 TDs and, being the true number 2 receiver, on this Lions offense was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and then at number 1, and number 2, we're gonna have David Njoku and Harrison Bryant. maybe the best tight end duo in the league. Of course, that's a joke, but in reality, we knew who number 1 and 2 is. It's just a matter of where you have them. A couple weeks back, we talked about it, and when we were ranking players in the postseason and in the Super Bowl preview, I had George Kittle at 1, but I don't know, maybe it's just my nostalgia holding on, but I just think with that Super Bowl run and that postseason run, I'm going to continue to give the edge to Travis Kelce. But again, the best overall tight end in the league is George Kittle. But again, I forgot to mention some honorable mentions. We have some guys like Kyle Pitts. The talent is there, right? The production is not up to par. But Kyle Pitts is, of course, the talent base should be in the conversation. David Njoku had a career year. He is in the conversation. Some other guys across the league as well. Trey McBride. It's a little bit early, but I think he is going to be on the rise next year. So we'll be on the lookout for him. But your thoughts here on 1 and 2. We knew who it was going to be, but you preference George Kittle, and I can't blame you. But why do you preference George Kittle in this debate here?
Yes, I think with George Kittle, if you were to put him on any other team in the league, I think he strives slightly better than Kelce. And I think Kelce and Mahomes have kind of just built that chemistry to where, they both benefit from it.
Like
for George Kittle, yeah, exactly. I'm looking at George Kittle and looking at both of them play. And, even though Travis Kelce played amazing, throughout this playoff run, and I can understand why, somebody might have him at number 1. I think they're both interchangeable, but the biggest knock I have for him is, throughout the playoffs, and throughout this year, there's no reason why, you should be that great. And Andy Reid and the Chiefs are subbing you out on 12 personnel because you struggle to run block. And,
Yeah.
for George Kittle, I mean, it doesn't matter. He's in the game, from start to finish. And, I'm looking at his year. I mean, the dude had 1,000 yards receiving on 60 receptions, which is crazy for a tight end. And I think for him, for him to have that bounce back year kind of, in my eyes, made him number one.
Yeah, I think if you put George Kittle on, I'm throwing on a team, hypothetically. You throw him on a team like Green Bay, even with a younger Jordan Love, this is a guy that would no doubt be the number one tight end in the league just because overall his offense would target him more. It's kind of funny how, we know how great of a blocker George Kittle is, but you think a guy that this talented would get the ball more and of course, be the no doubt undisputed best tight end in the league. It's just not happening for George Kittle. But, of course, we see through the lack of production, even though he's still having great numbers. And I think going forward, he's going to be the number one tight end in the league. I think if you ask me from a week from now, a week removed more so from this past Super Bowl run, I think I'm going to have George Kittle back in my number one tight end. Honestly, talking about it now, he still might be my number one tight end in the league. And then we finish off with head coaches before we dive into some news. So stick with us here. At number 5, I have Kevin Stefanski. You have Mike Tomlin, 2 AFC North head coaches. I think Kevin Stefanski, 2 Coach of the Year awards in his first 4 years of head coaching, definitely deserves to be noted here. And especially last year, we dealt with some of the most key injuries in the league. At one point, what do we have? 20 total day one starters out for the year. It might have been more than that, as crazy as that might sound. But Kevin Stefanski battled with this team. And we're a couple different momentum plays away in the playoffs from at least making it to the second round against the divisional opponent with a 39-year-old Joe Flacco, right? You have Mike Tomlin, though, Mr. Non-losing season. Do you think, for one, he can keep that going next year with maybe a different change of scenery as far as a roster? But also, your just overall thoughts on Mike Tomlin being a top 5 head coach despite the lack of playoff success.
So, this fifth spot, I wasn't sure if my bias was getting away or not, but actually I had Stefanski at that 5 spot, but, I kind of looked at him and Mike Tomlin, and, for me, I don't really care about the losing season stat because, I feel like if you're winning 9 games every single year, that's like just as bad as pretty much not doing anything at all. I'm not really impressed. And, but for Mike Tomlin, like these are some terrible teams winning games. There's absolutely no way this team made the playoffs with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph. And, at least the Browns, still has some great talent on offense. The Steelers obviously do, and George Pickens and, Jalen Warren kind of stepping up. But, man, I don't know how, this team is not going away and winning games. I think this team is one good quarterback away from, actually making some noise.
Yeah, no, I think, if Tomlin wasn't 5 for me, he was 6 because you got to think about it. His quarterback only had like 700 total passing yards on the year, and Kenny Pickett.
That's crazy.
So for the majority of the year, you had Mitch Trubisky, who is a backup for a reason, and Mason Rudolph as your quarterbacks, and then T.J. Watt, a guy that was out for the majority of the season, yet you don't have a losing record. Mike Tomlin continuously shows how great he is as a head coach, year in and year out. At number 4, though, we have another AFC North head coach. Shows you how great this division is. John Harbaugh, a guy that year in and year out is going to get you 12, 13 wins with this Baltimore Ravens team. This is a team that has the roster to compete with anybody. And we saw that this year as they dominated teams. Not only won, but they dominated across the regular season and even, for parts of that game against the Houston Texans. John Harbaugh is just a great coach, and now his brother joins the league. Maybe we get another at least playoff matchup between these two. But as of right now, John Harbaugh is the leader of the reigning best regular season team. So, we deserve to show him his flowers. Your thoughts here about John Harbaugh, and if you want, transition into number 3.
I think, this 3 and 4 spot came close to me, but, for Harbaugh in that 4 spot, the reason why I have him at 4 is because, he's drafted so well. Drafted well, being able to grab these guys and develop them even better. He grabbed Roquan Smith, made him even better. He drafted Kyle Hamilton and, turned him into a top 3 safety in the league. And, I think for John Harbaugh, he's showing year in and year out why he should be in this conversation. He's, he already has the resume, has a Super Bowl win, great deep playoff runs. I think for John Harbaugh, he deserves all the respect in the world.
Absolutely. And number three is a guy that on the NFC side of things has had the best record as well, as John Harbaugh did on the AFC side of things. But Kyle Shanahan, two Super Bowl appearances in the last 4 years, came up short against the same team, kind of in the same situation both times, where they just couldn't get it done to close the deal. But still, this is a guy that's no matter what position he's in, whether if it was with an offensive coordinator position in Atlanta or as the head coach in San Fran, if he has the roster, he's gonna make a deep playoff run. I think he's one of the best schematic coaches. Now, when it comes to fourth quarter, it just seems like there's something missing, and there's something that always seems to fall apart. And sooner rather than later, we're gonna have to start pointing the finger at Kyle Shanahan more so than his coordinators or the players not making the plays. But Kyle Shanahan's still an amazing head coach, and arguably you can have him at number one. But the both of us, we have him at number three. And why is that for you here at number three?
Like I just mentioned, no matter where Kyle Shanahan goes, he has an impact. But the biggest knock I have for him, I mentioned this throughout the season. The problem with his scheme and the offense is that, his team's always scoring bursts. Like they never casually,
Right.
consistently, kind
Stay
of
in the
dominate
fight.
the field. Like exactly, like they got to score 14 points back to back, 21 points back to back. And it's like once those fourth quarters hit, you just touched on it perfect. Something seems like it's always missing or holding them back. And
Yeah.
I think this 2 and this 3 spot is really, really close, but I think just the fact that this number 2 spot got over the hump. I don't knock Shanahan too much because he played against arguably the greatest player in history. Both times in the Super Bowl, but I got that number 2 spot over him just because he's gotten over that hump.
Yeah, and the number two spot, this might be biased, but if I'm starting a franchise today, I've said this last 4 years, this would be my head coach. And I think there is a sizable difference between two and three. Again, personal preference, but I'm going to go with Sean McVay. You will as well, as we both have him at number two. I just think, he had a down year last year. Of course, Kyle Shanahan had a down year when he didn't have his guys, right? And he had a CJ Beathard at quarterback. John Harbaugh had a couple down years when Lamar went down 2 years ago. Sean McVay is one of those guys that when he has the roster, he's going to make a deep playoff run. And he had a team this year that some people had as a 3-win football team. He brings them to the playoffs, and me and you talked about it. Seriously, we were like, this team can make it to the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
That's how great of a coach that he is. And I just don't think he gets as much, gets attention from the media. But your thoughts here about Sean McVay?
You just touched on every point I was going to touch on. This Rams team, before the year was counted out completely, and you saw once this quarterback got healthy how dangerous they were. And man, and the thing that kind of made me allude to him putting him at 2, was that game against Baltimore. Seeing them absolutely dot up and scheme up against the best defense in the league, something no other team has done this year. As great as Andy Reid schemed up, that Rams team looked like
Yeah,
they could go ahead and win it all.
yeah,
And
31 points.
exactly, and they go ahead and draft a no-name receiver nobody knows, and develop this man in a certified top 10 receiver. And the thing about McVay, I'm scared of the Rams next year if I'm in the NFC.
Yeah, Kyron Williams as well made a name for him, and that was, of course, due to the scheme of Sean McVay. At number one, we have Andy Reid, the Patrick Mahomes merchant. No, I'm just joking. But Andy Reid, this is a guy that's, saw an eye for a talent of Patrick Mahomes, a guy that's many just saw as a gunslinger out of Texas Tech. Andy Reid saw the potential, probably not to this level, but he saw some potential, drafted the man, developed him, especially with Alex Smith. And now he has maybe the greatest football player of all time. And that has helped them win Super Bowl after Super Bowl and make it deep playoff run after deep playoff run. But Andy Reid, as great as Patrick Mahomes is, I think Andy Reid's just as great. And I think he's now in a position where he could be argued as he's the greatest coach of all time. I don't know if I'd go that far with Bill Belichick winning 6 rings. But your thoughts here about Andy Reid and why he's the best coach here in the NFL?
Yeah, I think he's undoubtedly the number one, coach in the league. And the thing that was most impressive was how this Chiefs team, after a year, just like shift their whole entire mantra. They went ahead and instead of focus on load up the receiver core, load up their offense, they went ahead and put more money in the defense and stuff like that. And it was honestly crazy. The past 2 years, there were even fans trying to, discredit what he was doing. Putting, a lot more light on, Eric Bieniemy. But it's like, he left and they went and did it again.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the first topic was, them having Tyreek. People were like, oh, Andy Reid and Mahomes can't win without Tyreek. They crushed that narrative. And then you go into this year, Eric Bieniemy leaves, and they do it again. And I don't know what's wrong with this Chiefs team, but if you were to look at them in the regular season and look at them in the playoffs, it was two completely different teams.
Yeah, now situation matters, and you touched on it there. I was going to circle back to that. You touched on everything, but I'll just say this: situation matters. But Tyreek Hill, 0 playoff wins since leaving Andy Reid. Eric Bieniemy, he's out of the league. This dude is coaching at the collegiate level now, and he is not, in the conversation to be a head coach when Andy Reid made him look like an NFL head coach. All I'm going to say is we got to start we got to start adding these to the resume of Andy Reid, making certain coaches look as great as they are, or at least as they're perceived to be. But Andy Reid, #1 head coach in the league. That is our positional things. We were going to do offensive linemen, but I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't. If you want me to do offensive linemen, I'm going to look at PFF, and whatever they say is really going to be my top 5. I might be able to throw out some great names, but there's so many offensive linemen, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't evaluate offensive linemen as well as other positions. But that is our top 5 coaches in the NFL going into next season. But Amir, before we get out of here, I want to touch on some news here. 3 main things of news. These 2 are more so serious. The last one, we're going to talk about some of the biggest news that we've had as of late. But Russell Wilson recently sat down with Shannon Sharpe on the Club Shay Shay podcast. Shout out to him. But Russell Wilson, in that interview, he talked about a lot of things, but the biggest thing that stuck out to me, and of course the biggest quote that has been going around, Russell Wilson believes, for one, he's still a Super Bowl caliber quarterback, but he wants to win 2 more Super Bowls here in the NFL, whether if it's in Denver or another team. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions here, kind of a loaded question. Do you think Russell Wilson is a Super Bowl caliber quarterback? And then, do you think he can win 2 more Super Bowls? Or we'll say, hey, do you think he can at least win 1 more Super Bowl, depending on the situation?
Oh, first thing I want to say is, I don't blame him for saying that. Because I've seen some people in interviews say some crazy stuff. At the end of the day, you have to be your biggest believer, and it would be kind of dumb for him to sit up there and say, "Oh, I'm not going to win one for the rest of my career," and obviously he's going to answer something outlandish like that. But for Russ, I feel like there's a group of guys in the league that can be a Super Bowl quarterback, but they need an absolutely loaded roster around them. And I think if Russell Wilson was the head guy on the team and the leader on the team, I don't think he can be a Super Bowl quarterback. I think he took a step back. I think his prime in Seattle is over with. Even in Seattle, he was inconsistent. Every year he was starting off the first 5 weeks looking like he was about to win MVP, and then completely just dwindle under pressure for the rest of the year. And I think for him, he need literally everything to go right for him to even be in that conversation.
Yeah, you touched on it there. You have to be your biggest cheerleader, especially in the world of sports, especially when you're getting up there in age. You got to start, promoting yourself if you're not of the likes of Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, where whether if you're coming off a serious neck injury like Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, you look like a shell of yourself. And unless you're that great where you could be considered the greatest at your position ever, you're gonna have to be a little bit of a promoter for yourself. Going into different phases or different chapters at the end of your career to extend your career potentially in a better situation, if that makes sense, right? Tom Brady looked like a shell of himself, found a great situation in Tampa, and he reminded the world, hey, I'm still Tom Brady. I don't need Bill Belichick. Peyton Manning did a lot of the same when he went to Denver late in his career after that serious neck injury. But I agree with you. I think he would need a perfect situation. I think he would need to be in a situation like San Fran, though I don't think he's a better quarterback than Brock Purdy. I think he would have to be in a situation like San Fran where he has everything around him, or a team like Philadelphia where you just have a loaded roster and he can do just enough to get you over the top because he's been there and done that. But I don't think Russell Wilson, I think that those days are behind him. But let's talk about some unserious news here, Amir. Justin Jefferson. There has been reports that arguably the best receiver in football is available for trade. The Minnesota Vikings are in a weird situation now where their guy for the last couple of years, Kirk Cousins, for one, he's getting up there and he's coming off an injury. He potentially could not be the quarterback for this team next year. We'll talk about that next week. But let's get interesting here. Let's say Kirk Cousins goes elsewhere this offseason. Would you trade Justin Jefferson? If you're the Vikings GM, would you trade him and try and get more draft capital to build elsewhere here in the future of Minnesota?
Personally, if I'm Minnesota and Kirk Cousins was to leave, I think Minnesota will have to be forced to trade him because I don't think he would stay anyway. I think he will force his way out and go find somewhere else because it's kind of like this Minnesota team. I mean, they've had some good seasons. With Jefferson there, and it's like for him, I mean, you're watching these games the past 2 years, and you can tell it's some chemistry issues going on. He's already kind of losing that happiness there. And, I think if Kirk Cousins was to leave, I mean, you would have to trade him to get a haul, get some draft capital, and just start fresh because it's like if not, he's going to leave anyway, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, no, I think especially in the world now, especially when you have a team over there in the AFC North that there's two players on that team he won national championships with, and two players that he has a lot of chemistry with. Of course, I'm talking about Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase there for the Cincinnati Bengals. As a Browns fan, I hope that never happens.
I am praying that does not
I
happen.
because I promise you guys, as much as I believe in Joe Burrow, I think one, I can't really make that big of an argument for him anymore, but I can promise you, Patrick Mahomes probably isn't going to win another Super Bowl if Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Joe Burrow is a duo there in Cincinnati, at least if they can stay healthy. But there's been some rumors going around that maybe Kansas City makes a move for him because I've seen the package of two
Oh
first
man,
round
I
picks.
hope not, man.
I,
I
I've seen
hope
the
not.
rumor that the Kansas City could trade two first round picks and 2 seconds the next 2 years,
Oh
and a
my
guy like
god.
MVS to make the cap space work, the cap trade work, for Justin Jefferson. For one, if you're Kansas City, would you trade two first round picks and 2 second round picks? Or, that might be an easy yes. So let's get crazy. Would you trade your next three first round picks and seconds? This is kind of like a draft day trade, right? In the movie. Would you trade your next three first and twos for a guy like Justin Jefferson?
Man,
Because you got to think,
that
Travis Kelce's getting older, but at the same time, is Justin
tough.
Jefferson going to be good enough to fill all the voids of this Kansas City team in the coming years?
I mean, that's tough. The only reason why I'm thinking about it is because I think Mahomes is that good. And, I think a guy like Justin Jefferson, if you go ahead and put him on that team, they could do some damage. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, if you're to trade all those draft picks, I mean, the defense is
That's
going to be
six
terrible.
valuable picks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that's absolutely crazy. So personally, I wouldn't. I think in the state of free agency, you could end up, picking somebody else up. Trading for somebody, that would require less, or end up drafting somebody, to make better, with Mahomes, and well, Mahomes has already kind of shown, he can win with his minimum receiving core. So
Yeah.
I think go ahead and trading for Jefferson will just make that team, even worse.
I think I would differ from you, and I agree with you there, where it's Andy Reid has shown that he can use minimal wide receiver talent and to get this team to win Super Bowls, especially after Tyreek Hill left town. But I just think, man, I think just the
That's tough.
potential of having that duo, it's really Tom Brady and Randy Moss reincarnated. History is going
That's
to
tough.
repeat itself. And I think if Jefferson landed even with an older Kelsey and Patrick Mahomes, I don't know. I think, obviously we're talking
They
about
might
this too highly
three-peat.
because he's that talented of a receiver. But I'm sorry, what'd you
Yeah, they might mess around and 4 or 5 peat.
say? Especially with a guy like Justin Jefferson. So just for the selfish football fan in me, even though I'm a Browns fan and I don't really want to see it, if I think if this deal was on the table for Jefferson to go to Kansas City for three first round picks and 3 seconds, some cap fillers along the way. I want to see it, if I'm a football fan, to be honest with you, especially if Kelsey eventually retires, Mahomes still has a guy that can keep them relevant and keep him in the GOAT debate. But again, Jefferson, I think it's already kind of been shot down by the Minnesota GM that he's not going to be traded. But we've also seen in other sports that GM say, we're not going to trade you, then you get traded. So I guess keep an eye out for this. But I think very unlikely. 2% chance, I'll say, that Jefferson gets moved this off season. But then we're going to finish off the show here with something fun, something laid back. And of course, I want your thoughts about this, as we got some news last week or the week before that the college football game is going to be returning to us. Of course, NCAA 14 was the last college football game that we got. In my opinion, a top 5 video game for me of all time, especially as a sports fanatic. And 10 years later, basically, we're gonna get the return of it. And we've got a lot of interesting news, as of course it's coming back. They say it's gonna be on the same playing engine of a game like Madden. So it's gonna feel like Madden, but at the same time, we've also had reports that said, it's not gonna play exactly like Madden. So I want your overall thoughts. Are you excited that this game is gonna return? And I guess your first thoughts about this before we dive into each game mode.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I'm worried, like for that point you just mentioned, that's going to be like Madden. I mean, 'cause Madden has been disappointing in the past, 4 to 5 years. But I think for this game, I think all the game modes that they're saying they're going to have in it. The fact that you can play with all these different schools and stuff, and all these different modes. I feel like no matter how trash the game mode, the gameplay might be, I think the fact that you have all those modes and all the versatility, it'll kind of make up for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, the teams that I'm kind of most excited to use are those MAC teams, those underrated teams. Building them up, turn them into dynasties and stuff like that. I'm excited.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it there, and we'll get into it now. Then, if you're going to start a dynasty mode, what are what's the team that you're excited to use, or what are a couple different teams that you're excited to use? I'll go first. I'll say that some of these new teams that are on the screen, you see Kennesaw State, of course, they're on the left side of the screen. You see Jackson State, of course, returning to the FBS level. Coastal Carolina, Liberty, of course, you see teams like Charlotte making their debut into the college football franchise. To me, I think a team that I really want to use because of their jerseys is a team like Tulane, and of course the Green Wave is just a cool name as a team. But there's other teams that I'd like to use. But Tulane, I think whether if it's in Road to Glory, as a player, most likely a quarterback, right? Who doesn't create a
Right.
quarterback? Or whether if I just take them over and try and build them into a dynasty, Tulane's probably going to be my team. But your thoughts here, and what's a team that you're excited to use here, whether if they're a good or bad team?
I was thinking about this. I really don't know what team I'll be excited to use, but if I had to pick a team, like I just mentioned, it's gonna be one of those MAC schools.
Yeah.
Those teams that are like, struggling. Terrible. A team like Akron that's absolutely horrible, and having that challenge of building them up. Kind of progressing. And also, knowing a lot of guys who plays for those teams as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're from the in the general area, so of course there's some connections there. But I guess I'll ask you this: what is the first mode you're going to play? Is it going to be a career mode? More so if I know you're a cornerback. Shout out to
Hmm.
Siena Heights University, right? But I know you're a cornerback. Is the first thing you're going to do is create yourself and go in the road to glory mode, or is it going to be
Yeah.
more so of the building a dynasty?
First thing I'm doing is going to road to glory mode and making a corner. I think, my whole entire life, making, quarterbacks, receivers, or running backs. I want to try something different. Make a cornerback and just have fun with the game. Just
Yeah.
try new things out.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to create the next QJB. What was his name? London Bridges, something like that. If you guys know, that was a great YouTube series back in the day. I don't even know if he's still doing it, but for when he was doing it, he was very entertaining. But the last thing I want to ask you here, because I know we're both going to get into these online dynasties. Of course, we're gonna have some big collegiate leagues going, and we're gonna rekindle our rivalry, I'm sure, at the end of the day. But what are your thoughts on NIL being added to the game? Can you imagine building up a team like Akron, and then one of your players that you build up is just gonna leave you for a team like Alabama? What are your thoughts on NIL, and do you think it's going to be a good addition to the game here, especially in dynasty mode?
I really don't know. I hope EA Sports doesn't do something where it's like it's no good balance. I feel like with EA Sports they tend to have this tendency of adding new things, and there's no balance. It's either like really good or really bad. But I mean, I think adding the game isn't a bad thing because it's realistic.
Yeah.
State of college football and everything. Having to adjust to that. Having to find new recruits. Change up schemes and stuff like that. I really don't mind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, overall, I'm just super excited. I think I kind of just have to make it through. There's some games I'm excited to play from now until July, which I think is the release date of the game. But once July hits, I don't know if you're gonna be able to take me off this game, unless it's like Madden. But this is gonna be a game I'm gonna be on pretty much all day, every day, if possible, right? But that
Right.
is, of course, going to do it here for today's show. I do want to announce before we get out of here, this Saturday, I'm going to be releasing my first mock draft on the year. So if you're interested, this Saturday around noon, 1 o'clock ish, my first mock draft will be released. And Amir, of course, if you're interested in that, maybe we can get you on and do a dual mock draft. But of course, completely up to you. After that, the NFL draft combine starts on Thursday. Of course, goes until Sunday, which is my birthday. Um, and on next Tuesday, we're going to be doing a video recapping the NFL Draft Combine. Who are the biggest risers? Who are the biggest fallers in this draft process after the Combine? But your thoughts here, Amir, or your final thoughts before we get out of here?
I'm really excited for that next episode. It'll be kind of different. Talking about the other side of the ball. I'm excited for the combine. Seeing some guys that I watched play in high school. I actually played against and kind of trained with as well. Seeing these guys pick after their dreams. Chasing everybody's goal.
Yeah, I mean, I was a dominant tight end once upon a time, but never on the level of Amir, especially at the collegiate level. But that is going to do it here for today's show, episode 144 in the books. And as a 20-year-old, this is the last podcast for me. So I want to say thank you. And when I hit 21 here this upcoming Sunday, hopefully this podcast can level up just like I am. But until then, we'll see you guys and see you guys next week.